somebody says, I was bitten by a dog, and, I still, when I think of dogs, I tighten up and that kind of thing. So, but I can just give some examples.
Let me think. Well, for instance, I can think of it's not quite as clear cut as what you're suggesting, but a sense of failure and rejection. I really am reluctant to talk about it or to be vulnerable and admit it. And there's a part of grieving that's involved.
All right.
That's not specific.
It's not
as cut and dry as a dog biting.
Yeah, so it's when you think of that incident, you feel some intrusive thoughts.
I guess I would feel more, do I really want to share this? It's more the secretiveness around it, and because of that sense of perhaps rejection or that sense of...
I actually am just really stuck. I've always been stuck. I can't get through my head the difference between vicarious and secondary.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can,
There's I think there really isn't.
Yeah.
I see a difference between those two in compassion fatigue.
Okay.
Can be. But, the only, often when I think it is that you're hearing stories over and over again and it's accumulation, you'd probably more call it vicarious traumatization, where if there was a specific incident that was just so heavy.
Like one session and they just
Secondary.
laid it all out and
right.
then you went away and you were in shock.
Yeah, that would be the secondary traumatic stress.
Week after week
right.
after week, and now
yeah.
So now I just made that,
yeah.
and I can't remember which was, okay, so the accumulation
is the vicarious traumatization. But I don't know if they, I mean, so that's the way I think of it. There's so much overlap with all this stuff. And then compassion fatigue came out of Figley's continued work, where he just realized people didn't like secondary traumatic stress. It felt like, you weren't being a good professional if you developed that. So.
Should you be worried if it doesn't seem to bother you?
It depends. If you can still feel connected and concerned and all of those things, fine.
See, I mean, I can hear traumatic story after traumatic story after traumatic story, and I'm fine.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, but you put me under the car to change my oil, and I get traumatized.
Yeah.
So.
Because
Mm-hmm.
you would know the difference for you in that.
I'm sorry.
So what is traumatic about changing the oil?
I get frustrated. I feel terrible. It hurts my hand.
You feel incompetent.
I feel incompetent.
You're listening to the stories and you're feeling competent.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with the meaning.
Okay.
But if, as we talked about earlier, if the meaning of helping is I take it away, I fix it, then you're going to be traumatized because you can't do that.
Yeah.
But if it's that I can be empathic, I can help clarify, I can help teach strategies, I can help the person be empowered as they realize their own, then it's not going to be nearly as stressful.
Well, I mean, one thing that's helped me is Mother Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
People say, okay, she picks up these people, she washes them, she gives them a drink of water, and the next day they die.
Right.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And she says, it does make a difference. And
Yeah.
when you stop and think about it, all of our clients are going to die anyway.
Right, exactly.
And they're not going to get 100% better.
Mm-hmm.
But we're relieving we're giving them some human dignity.
Right.
And so that is a symbol or a metaphor.
Yeah. And I think Mother Teresa is a great example for not developing compassion fatigue and a great example for somebody who burned out frequently. So she did not develop compassion fatigue. She could set limits and she could be realistic about her compassion, but she was always physically going over and would crash and would be in medical crisis and the whole world would be concerned about her. So she was not taking responsibility for the burnout. but she was dealing well with compassion fatigue. So I think it's great to see that, you can have one and not the other.
Could
I'd
we
love to
talk
have had her.
more about the resultant shift distortions that occur in the caregiver's perceptual and meaning systems?
Yeah.
As opposed to burnout?
Mm-hmm.
Because people might not think they're burned out, because they might not recognize the distortions that have occurred
Yeah.
because of this continual exposure to...
Right. Well, then they would be, developing compassion fatigue, not burnout, necessarily. Because burnout's just too much for too long. It's the quantity where the other is the quality.
Right, and
Yeah.
I think people only recognize the burnout.
Yeah, they do.
They don't recognize the compassion.
Yeah, and they say,
fatigue.
I'm not burned out, but why do I
But
feel
we-
like I got to be a plumber now and stop being a counselor? Yeah.
Or the other staff on the floor can see it.
Oh,
but
sure.
they can't see it.
That's right.
And so how would you bring that into awareness? I mean,
Yeah.
we really haven't talked about the symptoms of it and how to recognize it, other than we kind of talked about some ways to...
Yeah, and a lot of that is what we're going to be
alleviate it.
doing now. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, to look more at those symptoms. And,
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of the symptoms are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so how many of you are really, know a lot about PTSD and the diagnostic criteria? Do you all know? Yeah.
I've
Okay.
had one class.
Okay. Yes, I know. Would it be useful for the rest of you to go over that, the criteria? Or briefly, just, okay. Oh, yeah, so to meet the criteria for PTSD, somebody has to have experienced a traumatic incident. But it doesn't have to be that you that you actually experienced it. You could witness it or be confronted by it in some way. And therefore, helpers would not have experienced the trauma the person's talking about, but will be witnessing their telling and be seeing the upset. The first section of symptoms, B, is that we persistently re-experience in some way the trauma. Either we have recollections just come out of the blue. Often people talk about seeing this movie unfolding, and it may, often with helpers, it's around embarrassment or shame. They will see a situation and know they're going to say the blooper that they feel so ashamed about, and yet they can't stop that memory. It comes and they watch the client crumple and they feel mortified, and that'll happen over and over and over again. Or they will hear the client talking about their rape or whatever else it is, and they want to shut that memory out, but they can't. So, but that happens out of the blue. Nothing triggers it. It's just there, and it can happen for many times during the day. There can be recurrent distressing dreams of the traumatic event. What's more common is to have dreams of the themes of the event, so that people have dreams and nightmares where they feel helpless or hopeless or horror or terror. That wouldn't go in this category. That goes down under difficulty around sleeping. But that's more common than actual dreams of the event. So often our dreams are metaphors of our experience. The acting or feeling as if the traumatic event were reoccurring, way less frequent. Do you have that very much? I sure don't. It has been just a few, maybe about 10 people that I've worked with who will all of a sudden be back there. And I had one guy who'd been in Vietnam who almost every session would be just talking along and there wasn't anything that triggered it, and all of a sudden he's flat on the ground with his arms like this, screaming because the strafing is happening. And he is just not present to the reality in his experience. Intense, 4 and 5 often go together, that when something reminds you of the trauma, you will have a lot of psychological distress, you'll feel very anxious, but you will also have the physical symptoms, like your heartbeat speeding up, sweating, feeling dizzy, short of breath, stuff like that. So those two often go together. So somebody has at least one of these. And then I believe that because this is so expensive in energy, it's distressing, the person wants to deal with it, and they do that by trying to numb themselves so that they're not feeling as intensely. And they do that by trying to avoid thoughts, feelings, or conversations associated with the trauma, or activities, places, or people that remind them. They might actually have psychogenic amnesia, where they just don't
It's not going to work.
remember. No, we've tried that.
It just won't.
You have to do that, yeah.
It doesn't work.
Where they don't remember some aspect of the trauma, and they don't even know they don't remember. So they'll be saying, well, I was driving down the road and all of a sudden I saw these headlights in my lane and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be hit. And then the paramedic took the cloth off my head. And I'll say, what happened in between there? And they'll say, there's no in between. That's what, and they just honestly don't believe until they really look at it and think, there's got to have been some time. So they don't come in saying, I got a problem with psychogenic amnesia. And those memories often come back as they desensitize. Feeling detachment or estrangement from others. Oh, depression, markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities. A restricted range of emotions, not being able to have loving feelings or feel much of anything. A lot of numbness. And really believing that the future isn't going to be good. That's it. In fact, I have a woman that I've been working with recently who said, oh, I guess it's going to be okay after a while, but of course I'll never really enjoy life again. And it was just so clear to her that that's the way it was going to be. As well as the numbing, some way of numbing. Hi, come on in, and it's okay. No, you're welcome. As well as the numbing, there's also symptoms of increased arousal. Our bodies react to this high anxiety. And so difficulty falling or staying asleep, or dreams that have themes that reflect the trauma. Irritability, outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilance where you're jumping and looking all the time. I have people sitting there scanning for danger all the time in my office. And exaggerated startle response. So PTSD is the only infectious mental disorder. It's the only one that other people can catch. Family members can catch, helpers can catch, and so we've got to somehow deal with that. Just saying I'm not going to catch it doesn't work. So there's a number of ways that I work with this for myself. I'm going to demonstrate this TDT, but one thing that helps is the meaning, again, of what I'm there for. And I realize that there's tons of self-help books about take control of your life, be in control, be a person's in control. And they really disturb me, because if I asked you to control your breathing, maybe breathe 17 breaths per minute, all of you could do that. But what you would find is that you couldn't do anything else. Because when you control something, when you have direct interaction and impact, you focus in. So if I said at the same time as breathing 17 breaths a minute, I want you to do this multiplication equation, it couldn't be done. So as soon as you're in control, you really narrow your sphere of influence. If you're in charge, that means that you're willing to have a lot of indirect impact. So to be in charge of my breathing, I would learn techniques to deepen it if it was too shallow, or to slow it down if it was too fast. And I wouldn't be watching it all the time to see if it needed that, but I would just trust that I would get a cue that said, oh, you need to use one of these techniques. So at that point, I could briefly move in and be in control, but then let go again pretty quickly. And if as helpers we're feeling we need to control the client, the progress of therapy or anything else, or our children as parents, we do ourselves in. Right away, the stress goes way up. If we can see how we can be in charge, how we can have that indirect impact, then that can help a lot. People develop PTSD, I truly believe, because they believe they need to be in control. I mean, there's other reasons as well, but many of the people that I see who've been, and I work a lot with, this is about the main disorder I work with, people who've been in horrendous, traumatic situations and don't develop PTSD. And it's not that they've got stronger moral fiber or anything else, but they say, well, you know, life happens, and this is terrible, and they still have some elements, maybe they need to be desensitized to intrusive thoughts, but they often don't develop the full disorder. But it's the gung-ho, you know, take charge, but really take control people that feel, well, I've always been able to deal with my life up to now, that fall hard when they have a traumatic experience because they are sure they're not dealing with it well. The Emergency Preparedness Canada has done some research on disaster, and they say in the first phase of disaster, say if an earthquake suddenly, you know, started shaking us to pieces, just even in this small group, about 25% of us would be calm, cool, and collected. We would be the helpers. We would say, get away from those chandeliers, get under the table, you know, don't rush out the door, wait till things calm down. About 50 to 75% of us would be confused, disoriented, but we would be sheep. We would follow what the helpers say. And about 15 to 20, and I know that can add up to more than 100, but 15 to 20% of us would get hysterical. We would, you know, pull ourselves into danger. We might pull somebody else into danger. And so, you know, which do you want to be? You know, probably you're not wanting to be number 3. You know, but that's the way it goes. There's always somebody in a group, and it might be having a bad hair day. It might be a specific meaning to the trauma. There can be a number of reasons. It might be because they're highly stressed already. But what I find when I go in to do debriefings in particular counseling agencies, and somebody's come in with a knife or, you know, whatever, I explain this and I say, who were the ones? And everybody looks to a few people. And I say, okay, you now are out of a job. Because what happens is you're going to be pedestalized. You deal well with crisis. So we're going to bring every crisis to you, and we're going to rely on you, and it'll generalize. We'll start to ask you advice on other things. And you can never let down. And that's why a lot of the helpers, like after 9/11 or whatever, just burned out because they were put on that pedestal. They weren't allowed to let go. So I say, the mop-up is going to be done by others. You're not to do it. That doesn't mean you have to cry or whatever, but okay, who are the sheep? Say a lot of people. I say, okay, so now you have a choice. You can start to do the mop-up, take over for these others, or not. Well, we're feeling kind of, you know, bad about ourselves. We should have been number 1. Well, you weren't. You might next time. There can be many reasons. You may know some of those reasons. Okay, who are number 3? Well, everybody looks away from a few people. And I say, okay, you're out of a job too, if you want to be. You don't know why you reacted like that, or maybe you do, but it's maybe will never happen again. You might be one next time. But what's going to happen is that you're already starting to become isolates. People don't trust you, even though they know that you've worked here for a long time and have had really good assessments. They're thinking maybe you've lost it now. And you're going to be marginalized, and you're going to leave. You're much more likely to develop PTSD because you felt you reacted different in an inappropriate way. The number ones are going to develop PTSD if they stay on the pedestal because they have no way of processing. They're not allowed to do that. And twos can just feel, incompetent and develop PTSD. So as helpers, we've really got to realize our reaction to some of these stressors and cut ourselves some slack and realize that, we react in different ways. It doesn't mean that that's set as the way we're all going to react from now on. So I help people work with that a lot in the groups, bringing everybody back into to the circle. Any comments or questions about that? Okay. Nightmares that come if somebody is highly stressed might, there's lots of ways to work with dreams. There might be a specific meaning in it for you, and you might know what that is, or you might want to do some work with it. But often, if the nightmares are part of acute stress disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, or even some of the symptoms that you have, it may just be your subconscious saying, you've been in a real scary position, don't ever do that again. Lots of people get those, don't ever get in the car again, don't ever, be alone with a male client, don't ever, and there's nothing you can do that's going to stop those nightmares by trying to placate them. So what I suggest that people do is take charge of the nightmare. You can't change what's already happened, but you can add to it. And I just was working with a fellow who has had the same themes come up in nightmare after a traumatic experience that happened 27 years ago. And he said, I get this almost every night, and I feel helpless, and I've tried, and he now has an Ativan addiction because he's, was trying to deal with these nightmares and get some sleep. So he finally came saying, I realize it's now an addiction. The doctor's trying to get me off it, but I'm terrified that I'm going to have even more nightmares. So I said to him, no matter what it is, when you wake up, close your eyes as soon as you can. Don't try to go back to sleep. I say that because some people do. I don't know how they ever could, but and pick up where the nightmare ended and start adding to it, not taking control of it, but by taking charge of it, showing that you have some power. You can do things to deal with whatever. And so he was dreaming that one of the dreams said he was falling off a cliff. He was about to get crushed on the rocks, and he'd wake up. So I said it can be as realistic or as fanciful as, it doesn't matter. Just start to now take charge of the experience. And so he dreamt that, or he imagined, okay, I'm falling. Oh, I got a parachute. And he pulled the parachute and he floated down. And another dream, another person having a similar one sprouted wings and flew off. And I'll say, keep it going until you feel relaxed. You may fall back to sleep again. Many people do that. One girl who had been in a ski bus accident kept dreaming that there was a garbage truck, and she was in one of those loading bays of a grocery store. So it was concrete all around her. She couldn't get out. And this garbage truck is coming, lost its brakes, and going to crush her. And so she realized, oh, I'm on a pogo stick. Now this was 20 25 years ago, so I don't know if kids even think of pogo sticks now, but oh, I can bounce out of the way. So she bounced up and then she said, and then I thought, now I'll bounce other places. And she just kept going, and she says, and I had a good time, and I bounced here and I bounced there, and then I just kind of drifted into sleep. So what you're doing is just, using a different metaphor to say, I can't stop bad things from happening, but I can deal with them when they do. And I would think about 35 to 40% of the people I teach this to never have another of these type of nightmares. In fact, they don't even have one to practice on. And they get so upset. They come in and they say, I was all ready. And I say, well, that's the whole point, is that instead of developing a phobic response to it, you were now looking forward to it. It didn't need to be there anymore. You'd taken charge. You knew what you were going to do. I really discourage people from choosing to do violence, though, in it. One man had been drinking and was not clear in his mind and heard some kids again on his lawn, doing wheelies, and I'm going to go confront them, and he got beaten badly. And so what he decided to do is, he kept dreaming that there were people chasing him and people surrounding him, and he took a baseball bat and he slaughtered them all. And of course, when he came to see me, his anxiety was like 10 times what it had been originally. And so we talked about, if you're doing violence, you're opening yourself to that. It doesn't help. So he the next time said in a big, strong voice, leave, and turned around the circle and saw them all run. And then he got more comfortable with it, and he started to very strongly reason with them and have them imagine them going away. So I find I've worked with young children with this as well as with adults. I use it a lot with people with head injuries, and it seems to help. So, comments, questions, or what do you use?
I was wondering what your thoughts on EMDR.
Well,
This is something you want to talk about.
No, we haven't. I developed this TDT about 25 years ago, and like it, so use it, and I know why it works, so I've just never got into that. Some of my colleagues use it, and yeah, I'm going to demonstrate it in a couple of minutes, trauma desensitization technique. I don't like any technique that people suddenly see as kind of a cure-all, which some people do. It's the new, right, just always groupies, So, but yes.
I don't.
We have. We did. I remember. Yeah. And I demonstrated it there, didn't I? Did I? Okay. Maybe I didn't. Just trying to remember. Yeah.
And you were great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I use EMDR and OEI.
So any other questions about this? Okay, so you're willing to do this. It's a little different, but feels okay with these people? I'm going to turn this off.
Okay.
There's a sheet that goes. don't deal with those original emotions, we don't admit that we're angry at a client or we're disappointed in how the therapy's going or something, then it can turn into the expensive emotion, and we kind of justify it to ourselves, and it doesn't help us and it doesn't help them. So I think that can really deal with stress. Also, having a clarified belief system, since it is the meaning of a situation that we react to rather than solely the fact of it. We've already talked about, healing. What is your definition of healing? What is your expectation that, healing would be healing versus cure? What I find often, if I can help therapists and I can also help clients look at the difference between that cure means the situation goes away or is completely fixed or whatever. Happens sometimes. More often, healing can occur where the person will be empowered. They'll realize resources they have that are important. They will get the strength or the love or the compassion or whatever it is they need. I want to tell a story from early on in my practice where a young couple had a baby die of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, and they were not dealing well with it. They were feeling very guilty. They didn't know, why their baby had died. They thought they had done something wrong, and in that they were pulling away from each other. I was told about them, and they could see me for free, but they said, we're fine, we're dealing with it on our own. But just about everybody in their lives had come to, either called my secretary or myself and said, can't you phone them? Their marriage is on the rocks. And of course I couldn't. But about 6 weeks later, a month to 6 weeks later, Bonnie called, the woman called, talked to my secretary, asked me to return the call. And when I did, I said, I'm so glad you called, do you want an appointment? She says, no, not at all, we're fine. I said, well, what can I do? She says, well, we're really worried about our dog, Lucky. I said, you're worried about your dog? She said, yeah, Lucky loved the baby and is so much in pain now. It's been over a month, and she's peeing all over the house, and her hair's falling out, and she's not eating. So she needs some help. Do you know of any counselors for dogs? And I thought real quickly, and I said, well, I could work with dogs. She says, well, great. She says, can we bring her? I said, well, we could probably meet tomorrow. The thing is, dogs are pack animals, and to do individual grief therapy with a dog doesn't work. You need to see them with their pack. There was a very long pause. Yeah, she says, that would be Chris and I, and we don't want to come for counseling. Now, I wasn't trying to trick her into therapy. What in that few seconds I thought, I bet the dog is not grieving the baby's death now. The dog is grieving the dysfunction in the family. And if I took her out of that, did whatever I was going to do, and put her back in again, her symptoms would return. So I was hoping that if they came, they could kind of see what I was doing, get on track maybe with supporting her at least, and it would be easier for the dog. So I said, look, I promise I won't ask you anything about your own grief. You swear, she said. Yes, I swear. So she said, can we come tomorrow afternoon? I said, yeah, 2 o'clock would work, but why don't I come to you? I think Lucky's probably more comfortable in her own home, which is true. But in the back of my head was, I don't want an incontinent dog in my office. Right? I mean, picture it. So peeing all over the house, no thank you. So the next day, of course, Lucky hears me before I even get to the door and starts to bark, and Chris opens it, and I greet him, and I look at this skinny, woe-begone looking dog, and her tail's wagging, but she doesn't look happy. And we go into the living room. He sits down on the sofa. The dog goes down on the carpet, and Bonnie comes in with a chair like this from the kitchen, turns it around, and sits as far as she can get from Chris. And they're not looking at each other. Okay, so I always like my energy model. I always look to see where the energy is, where I'm going to be able to get in. Not with them. But the dog, I don't know what else to do, so I get down on my hands and knees and start stroking her. I tell her what a good dog she is. I tell her some things about the grieving process, and it goes in waves, and we grieve for meanings and implications, and about SIDS. And, well, she starts to relax, you know, my touch and my warm voice, and she rolls over on her back, and I scratch her tummy. And I said, you know, people and animals need comfort and information and support and acceptance and touch when they're grieving. Bonnie said, well, look, it's working. She hasn't been like this since the baby died. Chris said, and I don't think we've given her any of those things. It's been so hard. I said, I realize that. And yet, I'm a stranger, and look at how she's accepting it from me. When you're able to give it to her, she will benefit. Well, right away, Chris gets down, starts stroking the tail. Bonnie gets down, stroking the head. Happy camper dog now, you know, and I sit back, and I'm watching for a bit. And then I said, you know, talking about some other things about grief, and I said, and guilt is real common too. And could you let her know you don't blame her? Because dogs are real sensitive, and she might think she's done something wrong. Bonnie said, oh, I'd never have blamed you. You're the best dog in the world. You love that baby. And then she was silent for a bit, stroking the dog, and she says, you didn't do anything wrong, but I am the mom, and I should have known. I should have known. And burst into tears. Chris stops stroking the tail, looks with total bewilderment at his wife, and says, I thought you weren't talking to me because you blamed me. I was supposed to get him for his 2 a.m. feeding. He didn't cry. I should have gone. She says, no, I would never blame you. I thought you would think I was a bad mom because I didn't know, and I was just waiting for you to say divorce. He says, oh, my love, and he puts his arm out. She leans into him. The dog gets up, goes into the kitchen. We can hear her chewing her squeaky toy. Happy, happy, happy. I watch for a while. Gets boring fast, right? Oh, we shouldn't have made assumptions. I love you, I love you. Oh, I thought, you know. So I said, okay, I'll come back, which I did. I saw the pack probably 3-4 times over the next couple of weeks because the dog always started with us, right? Lucky stayed there until she saw them connecting. I see that a lot of healing happened there. And I see the power of that healing was love. Because they could not love themselves. They felt too guilty. They couldn't love the other or show the love they had for the other because they were afraid the other was blaming them. But they could love their dog. And a little bit of love, moving, is very healing. Like I've got the research now, there's tons of research on love that shows it helps our immune system, it helps blood pressure, it does all sorts of things. It helps us deal with stress. And I now always ask the therapists who come to me for supervision about love. Who do you love? Who do you allow to love you? And if they say, well, really, I'm too busy or I don't, they're in danger for burning out or developing compassion fatigue. How do you love your clients? Oh, well, I don't do anything right. No, how do you love them? How do you show that you care? How do you let that just be present just in who you are? So they didn't get cured. The baby didn't come back to life, but they received healing. So I look to see where healing is in somebody's life, just like where what they did that helped a situation, what their resources are. And that helps me because then I know it's not all me doing it, that they have some valuable things to bring here. And I've clarified what those are, and I keep remembering them, and that helps me not be so stressed. So that dog taught me a lot.
So that was an interesting question that she started with, saying, do you see dogs?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
in all my years, I've never had a patient
Ask
me,
about that.
Will I treat their animals?
Yeah.
Have you been asked that before, or was that just...
No, it was...
It was their card to
The
present for therapy.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Have you ever been asked
I've been
that
asked
before?
weird things, but not that, although I've often found people will not let themselves grieve because they think it's going to upset a baby or an animal. I've got lots of widows that will say, one said, I just want to come home after work and have a good cry, but Mr. Budgie Bird just freaks when I start crying. And so I have to deal with Mr. Budgie Bird. Now, you can't, you put something over the cage and then it goes to sleep and you can cry. But, so I've had to work through some weird stuff, or, babies or.
Well, it was a wonderful question on their part, and it was beautifully intuitive on your part.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
To just go along with that.
It just felt, well, that's where I try to go with the energy. It just felt like there was, something there. And then when I realized, well, the dog isn't grieving the baby. The dog is really, And so, particularly with First Nations people, I often will go to their place and with the whole extended family. And I just check who is doing what that's helpful. And we clarify that, and then I try to stay away from that. And if I can feel I'm working with a community team, their support system, I think that it really helps me not reach burnout. I don't feel that. So I'll get adolescents, particularly, to bring in their friends, anybody that they feel supports them. We don't.
With the pack model.
Word with the pack model, absolutely. Just want to mention a few about spiritual discernment versus spiritual, between decision making. A few years ago, became very interested in the difference. Decision making, we just use the different resources and gifts and talents that we have. Spiritual discernment is really opening to mystery. It's being willing to be guided by whether people say God, higher power, our true self, something that seems to be beyond us. I ask people, and we don't have time to do this now, but tell me one of the best decisions you've ever made, and then how did that happen? And they'll often say, it seemed the right person came to me right at that moment, or this book almost jumped off the library shelf at me, or I had a dream, or I had this or I had that, and my intuition. I ended up in 99 and 2000 interviewing 60 people from 11 different faith traditions, asking them, when you felt guided to a decision, how did that happen? And did a phenomenological study. I got all these interviews, and then I got stories from people like Gandhi and Mother Teresa and Albert Schweitzer and the Dalai Lama, where they said how they knew they were guided, not what they did, but how they knew that, and did a phenomenological study on it, and found that that there's some prerequisites that help us open to discernment, and some qualities that help as well, and I just listed them. They're in my book, I'd Say Yes, God, If I Knew What You Wanted. It's got the 75 stories in that. And I've got a children's book, actually, that's just come out last week called Adventures of the God Detectives, which is kind of discernment for children. But so many people say to me, they make a decision, and then there's some other guidance that comes in over the next few weeks or whatever that either confirms it or gives some other information that they need to shift where they are. And I believe you can grow your discernment muscle. You really can tap more into that. So that's that. But daily spiritual practices and self-awareness and right living really help. It's really important to know what our ego tends to say to us, how the difference between that and that other voice, and qualities that help, and love and gratitude are some of those qualities. Receptivity, patience, trust, and active participation as well. The whole concept of spiritual detachment or ordered attachment is that we are passionately concerned with our client and wanting their highest good, and yet we don't have to take over, we don't have to control, we can, so detachment doesn't mean not caring or removing ourselves, it means placing ourselves very fully in love and compassion and concern, but not going past our boundaries, not trying to take over in our client's life, but also I often teach a number of my clients, especially who have got addiction issues, spiritual detachment. And we talked about the emotional anesthetic that comes in often at the beginning of the grieving process and numbs us. And I teach people to work with that and to pace themselves. And it might be that we're talking and they feel I'm too close and they need to back off. And I want them to be aware of that and to say, I'm going to move my chair back a bit, or I want to get up and walk for a little. It's when people feel trapped in a place that's not right for them that they feel vulnerable, and then they feel helpless, and then they're more likely to reach for something that seems to give them some solace that isn't good for them. Or if they can take charge and say, I want you a little closer, all right? You know, I've had enough for now. Often with adolescents, as they get into some real deep stuff, they can't even have me in the same room. I'll go into my secretary's office and call on to my office phone, and they'll talk for an hour, all this deep stuff, and they're feeling quite comfortable because I'm not in the room. So teaching them to monitor that, but also doing that myself. I have frequently said to people when it's been very heavy stuff, like what you're hearing, let's stop for now. Let's go back over what we've done. This has been incredible. Look at how well you've done, and wait until I calm down. Or I might even say, I'm going to just scoot my chair back a little bit. Okay, it was just getting so close that it was hard for me to hear you clearly. And at first the person thinks, oh, she's withdrawn, but then they see that I'm present, I have good eye contact, I'm an open, relaxed position, and they relax. But if I was sitting there feeling overloaded and tightening, they're going to pick up on that too, and they'll shift the story so it's not as heavy for me. They'll have to look after me. My doctoral dissertation was on ritual as a psychotherapeutic technique, and I researched a number of folk who had been stuck in grief. Some of them were mental health professionals, and how by developing a ritual, a container for their distress, they were able to move out of their stuck place, and found that rituals are preliminal, liminal, or postliminal. They're leading up to a time of transition, at the time of transition, or to consolidate it. And so it's important to get a sense of what the purpose of it is. It won't work if you do it for a purpose that isn't meaningful. And I've just written down some of the elements that need to be in ritual to make it psychotherapeutic. I have more detail, and I also have a sheet where people can develop their own ritual by asking themselves a series of questions in A Path Through Loss. Anyway, it's 5 o'clock. Has anything last before we stop?
Where do you write about spiritual detachment and the ritual components? Which of your books are more?
A Path Through Loss is the ritual one. The detachment I talk about more in I'd Say Yes, God, If I Knew What You Wanted. And I also talk about discerning during times of grief and loss and trauma. Also, this thing, which I've given you, it has a lot of this material on as well. And they've set it up so that you can get CE credits for it because you do a multiple choice exam after, and that ups it in the category.
Is that the grief therapy training?
Yeah,
First one?
it's this one.
And how many?
And there were a number of mental health professionals that met and asked me questions, and I kind of went through what we've been doing, this kind of thing today. But it's 5 hours, and I have a client was willing to come in and be desensitized using that model.
So those are audio,
All audio, yeah. Anyway, I'm very glad you came, and it was so neat that it grew. We have way more people than we started with.